We are recording. So this is the, do we want to turn the lights down a little bit more? Okay, all right. So this is the second half. The first half of the class was all about organization, importing, and good ways to organize your photos. And this one's going to focus on developing those. So I've imported a few pictures that I have here that I've edited in the past that will go through, and I'll show you different ways to edit different types of pictures. So this is just the organization view, what we call the library view. So everything that we're going to do here is in the develop view, and the develop view is the easiest way to get to it. Just hit. So you pick a picture that we want to start with. And we'll go ahead and start with this one here, and we'll hit D. Well, one thing you can do is, you notice here before you even do that, you've got this little quick develop here, which allows you to do just some short little editing right off the top. So you can automatically do, click on auto tone, and we can see, I'm going to move this, I'm going to close this side so we have more room to see it. So you can close, so you can just do auto tone, and you can see that it the auto ability in, if I go back, reset it, the auto ability is not too bad in some cases. That's often where I'll start when I'm editing a picture, is just to see what it looks like when I tell it to auto edit, and it will, and it didn't do it. Oh, come on. There it goes. There it goes. So and you can, I'm trying to get it to show, there's a way to show. So yeah, so you can see that it automatically does a little bit of pretty good editing, but there's certainly more that we can do to this picture. So we'll go into the develop mod, and you can go here and change the exposure back and forth with these settings. These just do fixed settings. You can change the temperature being the color balance, obviously, and the tint. So these are some of just a few of the settings you can do. They don't give you a whole lot here. This is just kind of a quick changes. But when you go into your develop module, that's where you see, I'm going to hide this panel here again. We're not going to be using it right now. So you can see that it's done a few. So you see the exposure. If we reset everything, everything goes back to, let's see, where's the reset? Develop. Settings, reset all settings. So if we do reset, it puts everything back to 0. Everything goes back to 0.
So the sliders all go back to the center.
Yeah, they go back they all go back to the center. The white balance is the way it was with the camera when it took the picture. So that's why it says as shot. Okay. In this case, this was actually taken. So let me go through these different modules, and then we'll start getting into what you can actually do with them. So I'll go ahead and show them all. So you've got multiple little editing modules here. The first one is basic, which is where you can change your exposure, your white balance, and change the color saturation. And that's and contrast. So it's your basic, it really is your basic editing. It's also where you can change it to, this is where you would change it to black and white or color. When you want to do a black and white, when you want to do a photo in black and white, instead you just can click on black and white. And of course it also hides down here the saturation, the vibrance, which don't do anything in black and white. The other way to do black and white is you can turn the saturation all the way to the left. But there are benefits to doing it this way, which we'll get into in just a minute. So the next one is tone curve. Tone curve is kind of a contrast, where you can set points on this curve and change, like what we're changing up here is the highlights, and then you can change the midpoint, and you can change the shadows to bring up shadows. So this gives you a different way of, and you can move them down here. You can change your shadows to be brighter and such. So this is a different way of doing the contrast within different parts of the picture, opposed to just the standard contrast slider, which is just sort of an all general contrast. This does contrast within certain parts of the picture, within the range of the picture. So you have your highlights, your lights, your darks, and then the, 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 the shadows being the very dark. This is the next one here, HSL, color and black and white. HSL is where you can change the colorization of the actual picture, of the actual different colors itself, where you've got your hue, your saturation, and your luminance. And you can change how each color is represented within this. So if you want to turn up the saturation of the reds all the way, you can see obviously that it gives them like little clown places, but you can get an idea of what that does. And you can change the hue, you could change the orange, you can change the reds to be more into the orange side, or you can give it more, make it a little bit more red looking, change the reds towards more purple or change it more towards orange. So this is where you can do, this is actually this is a lot of in the advanced, doing a lot of advanced editing where you can really get down into the nitty gritty of the color in a picture if you want to change the colors around a little bit. And then the luminance is just how bright the color, how bright is the red, or how strong is it. Talking about if this were in black and white, obviously you can't change the colors, but what it does there is it then changes to how it determines what's black and what's white, and it determines the mix of the colors it uses. So this is where when you're making a black and white photo, this is where you can really get into some details. Like if you're doing a person photo, you might want to have the reds and the oranges be a little stronger because, well, people tend to be, skin tends to be a mixture of red, orange, and yellow. So you might want to bring those up to make them lighter, and then you could, we could say the leaf over here is green, so we might want to make it darker because it's green, so we don't want it to be as bright. So you can change how it interprets the colors into black and white by modifying these sliders to pick or choose. Say if their shirts are blue, see his shirt is too white here, but if we turn it down, then it's not so bright because it's mostly blue. So it changes how strong the color is in the black and white. And you can go back to the color, and you can easily pick back and forth. Split toning. This is another one where you can change the color of certain parts of the photo. So like our highlights, we can change it, and the saturation is off. So we can change it to give it different colors within. For just the highlights, we can change it, where you can kind of give it old-timey photo looks this way, where you can get different film effects or whatever by changing the tone of certain parts of the picture. So if we change our highlights, we could make them like into a where you can warm a picture up for the highlights, or you can turn it to, so this way you see our white background has turned to blue, and we could do the same for our shadows. We could make them, you can make your shadows different colors. So the white background is blue, but then the shadows are brown or whatever. So there are certain effects, and actually this actually links pretty neat when you do it in black and white. Then you can go down here into your split toning, and you can start changing the color of your black and white to give it some interesting hue. So you can do old black and white photo looks this way if you really wanted to, where you could get some kind of sepia looks by just changing the split toning and give it kind of a sepia. That's obviously too strong, but give you some idea of ways you can change the look of a photo with just modifying the split toning colors. This has nothing to do with the color inside the photo itself, because obviously we're in black and white. This is adding color that's not there. So we'll set those back to 0 because we don't want to. And then we have, let's go back to color. Detail. Every picture needs sharpening. Some pictures need more than others, but every picture needs sharpening because when it comes out of the camera, it's not very sharp. Usually, portraits will have less sharpening compared to landscapes. Flowers, you don't want to over sharpen. And children, for sure, you generally don't want to sharpen too much on children because they're soft, but you don't want them to look blurry either. And there's a difference, except they move fast. So sometimes you might want to make sure your shutter speed's high enough because, well, they move fast. But when you're doing sharpening, men actually can be sharpened more than women too, because men tend to have more sharpened. I guess you think of women has more of a softer look to them. So, but men can generally be sharpened more. However, that's not always true. It depends on what you're trying to do with the picture. So if I zoom in, now this one's a little bit out of focus, so this is probably not the best picture to use, but when you sharpen, you see how what it's doing here. This is sharpening things that we don't want sharpened because the face is getting, we see how the face is starting to get real gritty looking, and so that's something we don't want. So what you have here is this mask. The masking, let's say we set it at 100. That's too much for this picture, but we'll show you what you can do with masking. What masking does is it will sharpen it. The further you move it to the right, the more it focuses on just the edges of the picture, as opposed to sharpening within an even portion, like in his cheeks or whatever. So you can see how the sharpening goes away from his cheeks, but it still shines out a little bit around the ear over here. The ear is still sharp, but the edges are sharp, but the inside of it is not. A trick you can use on the Mac, and you can do this on Windows. I don't remember what the button is, but if I hold down the Alt key when I'm just moving the slider, it shows me the edges that it's sharpening. So you can see the effect as to what areas, and we can zoom it back so you can see the whole picture. So you can see what parts of the picture are, although the bright parts are what it's actually sharpening. So for a portrait, you generally don't want to sharpen much of the faces everywhere. So, but you want the edges to be sharp. So you can set the mask all the way up, and it will sharpen everything but the face, or all the pieces that are the same that don't need sharpening. Radius is a piece that tells it how far it looks off the pixel. I don't really change it much more than between 1 and 1.5, but when it sharpens it, what it does is it looks at pixels around it to determine, it's a contrast kind of thing. So it's looking at pixels around it to determine, am I an edge? And if I'm an edge, then it's going to try and make that edge stand out. And the radius is how far it looks beyond a pixel to see how far it should go to determine if it's an edge. And so you can adjust that for it. It's a subtle piece to it.
So if you have that set to a higher number of pixels,
it will find edges. If you have it set further to the right, then it's doing more. It's going to do more sharpening.
It'll find more.
Yeah, it'll find it. Yeah, the tolerance for finding an edge is looser, so it will find an edge where there might not be an edge if you have it further to the left.
Also, will it make the effect of sharpening happen over a larger area?
Right. It's a stronger sharpen. It's stronger sharp. Everything to the right is stronger, except for masking. Masking is opposite. Masking is saying except. So what you're doing is you're saying, don't look at anything. If it's a lot of similar stuff, then don't sharpen it. So masking is kind of a how much do I determine an edge is. So masking. So if the pixels next to it all look the same, then it's not going to do much sharpening to it because there's nothing there to sharpen. But the masking is kind of determines how much of that it looks. So that's why we noticed the face would get more gritty looking when we were up close, because it's seeing differences. But when you start masking, that tolerance for the difference it's given it a bigger tolerance. Say, okay, I'm not really that different, so I'm not going to try to bring out sharpening.
But the masking makes it work more at the edges and less.
Right. So the edges will be the strong edges will be prominent, but face, like if there's facial features that you don't want to sharpen, because you don't generally want to sharpen wrinkles. That brings them out. So you don't want to mess with those. You don't want those to show out. But there are cases where you do, where if you want to do a gritty picture of a portrait, where sometimes if you get there's some really people with a lot of lines of whatever, and so the lines themselves become interesting. So then you could possibly do some sharpening and such on that to really bring that out, because it really brings out the detail of the face if they've got that. But for like portraits for like kids or whatever, that you want to de-emphasize that.
So the masking, it isn't the edges of the whole picture. It's the edges of each of
Right.
the features.
It's the edges within the picture, right? So because you can see, from the white, that's where the edges, that it shows you where the edges are, and so it's pulling those out. Noise reduction. Noise reduction is when you take pictures in the dark and you have to have your ISO turned up. And this one is at ISO 500, so this one's got a little bit of noise. When we zoomed into the face, we could see that it was a little bit noisy. So you can turn up your luminance to start getting rid of some of that. But when you do that, you're losing detail as well, because what it's doing is it's pulling away. Okay, so it knows that it's taking away difference. So it's taking away detail that would be there otherwise. So you really don't want to go too far with it, because if you go all the way, I mean, this looks like plastic Barbie skin now. If you go all the way to the right, you see you've got kind of plastic Barbie skin, which it's okay if you're taking pictures of a plastic Barbie, but it's not what a person would look like. Which is one of the problems that you will see. And luminance is only one way that they can do that, but you see that when people you look at those photos in the supermarket or whatever, they always try to make their skin is plastic Barbie skin, and it's not realistic. I mean, there's multiple ways that luminous is one way that gets rid of details, but there's other ways you can go in and kind of smooth out skin, which I'll show in a little bit. And then the detail and contrast is just ways to tweak it. Those are very subtle changes. And then there's also some color. If there's color noise, I don't find this doing a whole lot unless you have a lot of color noise. I think that's more if it's the darker it gets, the more your sensor will put color spots in there that if you look in detail you won't see them. This one probably won't show anything on that one, but those are all just removing noise, but they also remove detail, so you always have to be careful with how much you do. All right, so the next one is lens corrections. So lens correction only shows up if you're taking your photos in RAW, or is only easily useful when you're taking photos in RAW, because inside the RAW photo it has the camera information, the camera manufacturer and the lens, what kind of lens you used and who made it. And inside Lightroom, it has all these profiles for lenses to correct for ways that every lens takes a picture a little bit different, because it's not, it can't take exactly the same picture that you see. It's an interpretation of the picture, so each lens will skew the picture one way or another. Wide-angle lenses tend to make things lean in a little bit, and if you're up close, they'll distort it, so there's some amount of distortion in every picture, and this can help remove some of that. So it may not show up here because the particular lens I used for this picture was my 50mm. So if I click on, well, no, I'm sorry, I used my 70-200, which in this case it didn't change much. But if you click on it, you can see that it changes the edges just a tiny bit of distortion around the edges. It's very subtle. It's more noticeable in a wide angle, but you can see the edges bow out just a little bit more when I click it on as opposed to turning it off. And you can change how much, you can manually edit it, but you can see that how much it's not changing a whole lot, but and every lens also has a little bit of a vignetting to it, so that there'll be basically a kind of a dark circle around the edges, so you can adjust for that to get rid of some of it if it's there manually. But generally I just go with the automatic, because usually it will find the lens that I use and it's got a profile, so it just kind of corrects for the lens to make it look.
So Lightroom already knows from the camera of your file what
Right.
lens you used, and it automatically.
And this only knows from the RAW photo. So if you take a picture in JPEG mode, it won't have that information, because that information is not kept in the JPEG. You can come in here and manually do it later, and you can do manual adjustments for some of these too if it's not enough. But I haven't really gotten into the manual. I mean, I haven't really got into doing the manual. I always just use the default, because it generally does a pretty good job. It's more noticeable, I'd say, with like a wide angle than it is with the zoom lens, which is what I used here. Transform. This is not a good picture for this one, so let me go back and find a picture to use with transform so you can get a good idea of. Let's try this one. So transform is a way of helping to make your picture. You notice how that it leans. There's a little bit of it's going off to the, it's leaning down to the right, so the horizon is higher on the left than it is on the right, which the Earth isn't built that way, even though it's not really a flat Earth. It's still a straight horizon, especially when you're taking pictures at a beach. So what this allows you to do is allows you to set a level. There's multiple, it's not just that, but this is one way you can, if I click auto here, auto is a good place to do it. You see automatically it straightened that out. It said, oh, it can detect horizon. So if there's a good strong horizon, it will detect that and automatically level it for you. There is another way you can do that, and I'll show you that in a little bit, but that's one way to do it. Now, I clicked on auto, which doesn't just do leveling. It also fixes distortions in other parts of the pictures, like say if you had buildings that were leaning to one side or the other, it can detect that at some level and correct for that leaning so that because buildings don't lean unless you're at the Tower of Pisa. It can correct for that and straighten them again. And there are tools in here where you can do, if it doesn't detect, let's say for some reason it couldn't detect that this is a horizon, you can then go over here to guided and you can say, draw a thing on here and say, well, that's the horizon. That should be level. Now it has to do this more than once. It has to have two of them in here. So we can do another one and say, well, see, that's supposed to be level. So it can automatically level. Now, if you had a vertical piece in here, let's say we had a building that was leaning, that in the picture it was leaning like this. So you draw a line across the building saying this is what straight should look like, and then it will automatically straighten it for you. So it would straighten that building if there were a building there.
So it stretches the picture a bit?
Yeah, it stretches the picture a little bit to show you. Let me see if I have something I can show. Okay, these columns might give me a good way to show this here. Yes, I'll get back to that. I'll get right back to it. So if you can see these columns in here, so it's this button over here on the far right, that one's called guided. Let me see, can we just focus it a little stronger? Maybe?
Greg, is there a way transform can be turned off? Because my Creative Cloud doesn't have that on there.
To turn off transform?
Yeah, it doesn't show up on my column.
Yes. So over here is you can show and hide. If you right click, it shows you all the ones that are available. So you can, if I unclick that, then it goes away.
Where did you do that?
Just right click over top of these here, or you can do show all.
Perfect. Thank you.
The other thing I'm doing here while I'm in here is I'm showing it in solo mode, which means whenever I open one, it closes the one that I'm not using. So if I unclick solo mode, you could have multiples of these open at the same time. I use solo mode because that way it automatically closes the one I'm not using, so it's a little more screen efficient as far as that goes. So let me go back to this transform for just a minute. So let's say that these columns, so if I want to guide it, let's say this column might not be perfectly straight. And you can see how it's showing me the close. So I want these columns to all be perfectly straight. So we'll go over here on this one and make this one straight too. Go right there. And so it adjusts it just a little bit because they might be tilting just a little bit. Pretend that if I had done it like this, you can see how it skews it. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to make them straight for me. I'm telling it this should be straight. So it transforms it to make it straight. And you can do the same thing and it will adjust it to horizontal. Let's say I wanted, now this is because I took it at an angle, it's not going to be straight, but let's say you want your window to be straight. So if I wanted it to be straight, I can adjust it over here and then it would straighten it up. Now obviously it skews and that looks really bad, but if your windows were supposed to be straight, that's how you can straighten them. And but you see what it does is it cuts off part of the picture to make it do that, and you can then do a constrain crop, and it will automatically crop the picture to fit that in there. Now, that's not what we didn't really want this one, so we can delete, we can get rid of, we can reset that. Let's see how. I don't remember how to delete this one here. But we can also do an auto, and it can find, because I do auto, it can find it found these columns and say, hey, look, these columns probably should be straight, so it would automatically do that. You can also do just a level and just a vertical. Auto is where I usually start with, unless it's just obvious that the picture was messed up. So it can't find anything. I mean, there's edges in there, but it doesn't know what edges are supposed to be up and down. So that's when you would go to guided, or if you just want to go to just a level, like going back to that other picture, this wouldn't need anything more than a level, not a.
When you click guided, how did you generate your lines?
You're just clicking when you're
Take your little cursor.
Yeah, so if I do guided, I'm just clicking. You click on this will if it's not showing it to you, you can pick those. You can pick where they are here. So I'm trying to remember how to remove it. Reset guide uprights. We can reset them. So we can reset them, and so in this case, the only thing this would really ever need is a level, because there's nothing vertically obviously skewed. So you can just do a level. Either auto and level do essentially the same thing. And this right here allows you to do a skewing manually too. So you can, if you need to skew it manually, you can go change these skews here to, especially when you're trying to do, if you're taking up an upward picture like on a building or whatever, you can skew the transform. So if you want your building to look straight up and down, you can do that. And you can have all kinds of fun. You can scale it in and out, and you can see how it rotate it. You can also do a little bit of rotation. Now the other way you can do a level is with cropping. This is your crop tool up here on the left. So if I want to crop, when you crop, you can also, when you pull the cursor outside, you see the little, it's really small, but on the bottom left, you can see how it does arrows up, an arrow up and an arrow to the right. You can then rotate your image. When you click and hold, you can rotate your image, and that's what the guides there are for, to show you how to level. So that's another way of, if you just want to level, if you do it manually by eye, you can do it this way too. So either way, the transform's a little more powerful, but this is kind of a quick, easy way to transform, to do a leveling if you need it. Oh, while we're on cropping, so cropping, the aspect ratio is set to original by default, and you can come over here and change it to different ones. So 1 by 1 would be a square. And then you can, you have a lot of your 8 by 10s or 8.5 by 11, 5 by 7. So this gives you some fixed crop settings that you can use if you want to say, if you want to print to like a 5 by 7 paper, you can set, okay, well, this gives you an idea of what your picture would look like at a 5 by 7. And then you can click this lock. Now what this lock does, this lock keeps it within that aspect ratio. I can't change it outside 5 by 7. No matter which corner I'm grabbing, it's going to stay in a 5 by 7. And I just close it, but it stays as a 5 by 7. I can't change it outside of, I can't even move the down because it doesn't work. I can only change it on the corners. If I click on this lock, that no longer keeps it in 5 by 7. Now I can change it to any aspect ratio I want. So you're not worried about the ratio anymore. You're just cropping it completely free. The other way to do leveling is your angle. You can change the angle here, and you can actually click on this and draw a line here and say that's level, and then it will automatically do it for you. That's another way of doing the leveling. So it's got that angle. It can tell you how much of an angle percent it's off. Or
Is that grid automatically on there?
this grid, actually this grid is only on there because I did the crop tool. This grid will show anytime you're in the crop tool. So yes.
Angle is kind of the same.
Angle is that, and transform level are very much the same, very similar. Transform is actually going to do a little bit of skewing to the picture though, because what it's trying to do is it's not just going to level, it's going to skew it a little bit, where this one will do nothing other than just spin it. Yeah, it does nothing but spin. And constrained to image, because you can actually, when you're unlocked, you can potentially go outside your image. I think that's for the angle piece. And then we can reset it to go back to what it was. And I'll get to what these others are here in a minute. So effects, this is where you can add some vignetting. So if you, to the left goes dark, to the right goes white. And then you can set where your how much you have in different, and how round it is. So you can change how, so you can change it to how round it is, so you can change how much vignetting, and the feathering amount is, is it a sharp vignette? Is it a very soft vignette? So there's different settings for that. I always put a little bit of a vignette. Well, not always. I frequently put a little bit of a vignette on all my pictures. There are some that don't get it. It depends on the picture. It depends. I can't give you a hard and fast rule. Some of them it will make sense on, and some of them it won't. So possibly for this one I wouldn't, because there's nothing. The whole picture is the focal point, where some things may have a piece of the picture that you want people to focus on, so you would darken the edges a little bit to at least draw the interest inward into the picture.
Because in that regard, it's great. If you had, say, a couple in the middle walking on the beach at the water's edge, you might have more of a vignette to focus on the couple rather than the horizon, the ocean itself.
Right. Grain is for adding graininess, adding noise instead of subtracting noise. This is what adds noise, and this gives you options. Sometimes you want the picture to look a little grungy, or add some grainy. Try to do like an old grainy black and white. Well, this is one piece of doing that, to add a little bit add some noise, and how big the noise is. We can make it really look like it was, a canvas, and how rough it looks. So I don't, there's some pictures I do that with, some I don't. It's not a much used feature for me. Dehaze is a fairly new control. This is essentially kind of gets rid of, really it does exactly what it says. It gets rid of haze in a picture, or adds haze. So we can make it look like it was foggy out. Or if it was a little, you're at the beach, so there's a little bit of spray, you can remove. It's essentially what it's doing is it's a contrast tool that changes certain parts of the contrast. Obviously, if you go too far to the right, you can get some pretty wild looks, which can actually be interesting in a picture sometimes too. Or you can make it look like it was really foggy this morning and practically all the color was gone. If you want to add fogs, like I want this to be a foggy picture.
But it's really saturation.
Yeah, it's kind of a saturation change is what it is. Yeah, there's a little bit of contrast and saturation together. This is similar to clarity, which I didn't cover yet, which I kind of glossed over. I'll get back to it in a minute when we actually start editing. Camera calibration. This is another piece that only shows up when is only useful when you've got a raw image. Every camera has a feature in it that's called calibration, which is kind of a bias towards showing you the picture on the back of your screen to look like what you're doing, what you're taking a picture of. So when you take a picture in raw mode, if your camera shows you a picture in the back of the screen, it's doing some processing to that raw file ahead of time to give you that look. And if you notice, when we came here, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to reset all settings and make sure we don't have anything. So you see, that's kind of a dull looking picture. That's a beach picture, but when I took that picture on the back of my camera, it looked a lot stronger than that. The colors were brighter, the whole image was brighter. Well, the camera's doing some little bit of processing to that picture inside the camera. What this does is this gives you the ability, when it imports that though, it generally defaults to what's called Adobe Standard, which is dull and flat. You could call it dull and flat. But what this does is it gives you back some amount of that camera pre-editing. So if I click on camera landscape, it automatically brightens it up a little bit so you can see. So if so you can do a little bit of changing to the picture just by clicking on this, which puts some of that camera bias to the type of picture that you have, and it's different on, and you can set it. Camera faithful is where is not much different from standard. Neutral means that it's doing very little. There's not much to it. Camera portrait would be a portrait image. So it emphasizes a little bit of parts of the raw file to show you, okay, if this is a landscape, then obviously there's going to be more greens and reds and such. So, you saw that the sunset got a little stronger looking compared to that. So we're seeing the pictures the colors you would see in a landscape became stronger. And then you can come in here and this is kind of a fine tuning of your picture. So you can, we can make changes here. It's another place to change the color. And the process means it's just got different, they update the process every so often. So generally you always want to use the current process. But this is one way that you can get sort of an auto way of auto what your camera did. So it brings it back a little bit to look like what you took when you looked at the back of your camera. And yeah, go ahead.
If you use this, does it change the adjustments you made before to the color?
It does not. This is separate from those other colors.
So it doesn't move those other.
It doesn't. These are all independent of one another. Also, the other thing is the changes that I'm making are not touching the original picture in any way, shape, or form. What it's doing is it's taking the adjustments that I am making and applying them to the picture to show it to me on the screen. So it's kind of creating a final image on the fly based on all the adjustments that I make. So what it does, Lightroom, is it stores all those changes that I've made to the picture and processes them on the fly to the original to show me the final version. It isn't until to a JPEG that those become permanent in that picture that I export, but they still never touch the raw file. Yeah.
So is it best to do this first and then make the other adjustments?
Yes. This is probably where you would look to first make a change. If you wanted to say if this is a landscape, I wanted to go camera landscape to give me some idea of what it used to look like on the back of my camera. Now, it's not everything that the camera does, but it does some of the color adjustments and such to it. In fact, and I can show you, there is a way that you can have it do this automatically when you import your picture every time. And you can set that up, and I will get into that a little bit later. But there's ways when you import pictures to apply certain edits to every picture that comes in at the moment it comes in, so you don't have to do it every single time. Like what I have one set for is I have one that sets for the lens corrections. So every picture I import automatically does these lens corrections for me.
But Lightroom already knows what lens you're using.
Right, but it doesn't apply the edit unless I tell it. I have in my import setting apply this lens correction, and which it didn't do it on this one because I reset it. It wasn't applied on this one because I'd reset them all, so it got rid of all the edits, which includes the ones, but you can tell it at import time, apply certain edits, and I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit. That's another piece, but let's get into actual editing on this picture. So the first thing I've done is I've done lens correction. This would have been when I first opened the picture, it would already be applied. Camera calibration, we can set it to camera landscape because this is very obviously a landscape. I'm going to go ahead and do the transform. We'll go ahead and just let it do auto, which will level the picture. So we're getting some of the basic problems out of the way. And this is getting into some of your editing class too. This is just using Lightroom to do the edits instead of the tool. I don't remember which tool you were showing them, but yeah, this is doing a lot of those things in Lightroom. So in this case, we can also go in here and we can do an auto. I like to try auto. Sometimes, see, that's just went, and that went too much. That obviously went too much.
But you can see which sliders moved which way.
Yeah, it shows you which sliders move. So obviously this went way overboard. So we probably don't want to use auto because that obviously just took it way out of. I mean, it probably looked more like that in person. So what auto tries to do is it tries to balance it tries to balance, you see up here in your histogram, it tries to make a balance of the exposure range, but that's not what this picture is supposed to look like, so we wouldn't do that. Now you note the white balance, it was getting towards dark, so this is actually the as shot. So if we changed our white balance, we can adjust. This is another way of adjusting color, where you can get different effects based on the color that you want. So right now, as shot, it's pretty biased towards temperature warm. This is because it was getting dark, so it's probably a shade. I would call it a shade white balance, which tends to be biased more towards warmth. But if we wanted to go, say, daylight, you can see it gets a lot more blue because it was getting dark, so there wasn't so the blue is showing up more. Or you can even make it even more blue by picking tungsten, which is super blue, but that's what these lights are. These are tungsten lights. If I was taking a picture under tungsten lights, I would want tungsten white balance to make sure that the white colors show up right. So flash is kind of a neutral, which isn't too different from daylight. But since we were on shade, if I pick shade, you can see it wasn't too different. The camera shade, this is what Lightroom calls shade. My camera calls shade this, so they're just a little bit different. It's just how the camera interprets shade as a preset compared to Lightroom. And I'll keep it on shade. So in this case, we probably do want to bring up our exposure a little bit, but we don't want to go too far with it. So you manually edit it. We probably want to bring in some contrast. So, and then their highlights. Oh, and the other thing, most of these sliders, when I showed you the Alt button, do the same thing. Now, what this is showing me, what exposure shows me when I click the Alt button is what's overexposed. So when I move it to the right, you start seeing the blue coming in. That means that color is overexposed. All the information that is lost you've gone too far. So, and if you go to the left, well, it would show black, but obviously I can't see because it's already black. But so now contrast doesn't have one because there's nothing to show there, but it really shows in with highlights and shadows. Highlights will show me if I have anything overexposed. Now in this case, I don't have anything overexposed. So let me overexpose it on purpose and then show you how we can do something about that. So if I show the highlights, come on, let's go over. So you see here with the highlights, I can get rid of some of that. If I had it in the picture, I can get rid of some of that overexposed by moving it to the left. Now I can't get rid of all of it because I went too far. If you've gone too far, you can't. This is a way of at least trying to bring back some of that lost detail. So that blue means that's lost information. I can't, it's too far. It went too far. If I use the highlights slider, I can try to bring some of that back because the raw image actually has that information in it. Let me bring up a different picture that actually has highlights that we can see, and so here, this is a good one here. This is completely. Let's see. I think the only thing that this one has done to it is this is the only thing that this one has done to it is a lens correction. So we will. So you can see these triangles here on the top. When they light up white, that means you've got overexposed or underexposed in that section. So the right means overexposed, left means underexposed. And if I click down here on my highlights, you can see the white parts are what are overexposed, which is obviously the bright lights. We can try and recover some of that by sliding it to the left, which takes it out of overexposed. And because this is a raw file, that information is actually in the raw file, but the interpretation of the raw file means that I've gone too far showing it on the screen, so I'm losing the information in the picture. But it's actually there because I can actually, if I can move that slider to the left a little bit, I can see those white spots go away. And so the information, so you can see when we see how it's pulling down the brightness on the lights. If I go too far to the right, it's obviously turning them up too much. So you can turn it down to the right a little bit and get back some of that information. Now, there's not a whole lot in there because they're just lights. Shadows is the exact opposite, which shows me the dark spots. If I go to the left, everything that becomes black means its detail is lost. There's nothing there. Moving it to the right, we can recover it. it's removing contrast, obviously, but it brings out detail that you couldn't see before. So generally, when I'm editing a picture, you want to have your highlights a little bit where you're getting a little bit of spots. So you want to have some things that are all the way to the right on white. Now, that's not every picture, but if you want to have a range of exposure within a picture, everything, you want to have a little bit of white to the white, and you want to have a little bit of black. So you want something that would be pure black. So in this case, the bottom of the tires, those can be lost detail because those are dark shadows. We don't really need to see all the treads within the picture that we know they're supposed to be dark. Now the overall picture here, we can see from our histogram that it's biased to the left, so we probably want to up the exposure a little bit just to bring back some of that information because it's too dark. Whites and blacks are also very similar to highlights and shadows. They just set where your white and your black point in a picture are, and they do the same thing with the white with the spots and the blacks in the dark. So you can set your white point and your black points.
Greg, how are you getting to that screen?
I am holding down the Alt button when I turn. Each time you see this, it means I'm holding down the Alt button while I move it back and forth. Not every slider does it, but experiment with which ones that it will do it with. So all 4 of these here will do it because they're showing you when you've gone too far. What it does is it will show you when you've gone too far on this one. Same with the whites.
Is there a way to display your original and your edited version side by side?
Let's see. I believe it's this picture. No, it's this one. Yeah. So the left one is before and the right one's after.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's this little YY down here shows me the before and after. Before, after, it just tells you which one.
After each operation?
This is the unedited version here on the left. So anything I change will only change on the right.
And that's the YY.
Yeah, the little YY, which before and after, and you can change it to which way it does here. So I can switch it to be on the right if or I can move it to the left or. Oh, actually, what it did here is I can then move the changes to the left. Let me show you what I just did. Let me reset it and go back to what I just did with it. So when I reset all settings, let me swap it back. So this swaps it back and forth, by the way. So now I reset all settings. So this one went back. So this one still has all the edits, but the left one doesn't. So, but I can tell it to move my edits from the left. That's what these buttons here do, is like move the edits from the right side to the left or from the left side to the right. So if you don't like an edit, you can undo it that way or back and forth. Say, okay, I like that, move it over so I have another base. So this can show me any changes that I make. So if I move the whites all the way up, you can see that it doesn't affect the one on the left side. So that's the way you can look at your before and after.
And you can also see the effect of the most recent operation you performed on.
Right,
And
right.
you do that.
If you want to see, let's see. So hang on, let me go to the. I'm not develop module. Let me go back to my develop module. So if you want to, let's say, okay, I like where this is. So let's say I want to make the before picture look like the left picture. So I just click on that, and so the before picture now looks like the after picture. I just told it to make it the same, right? And then any changes I make will be based off. Any changes I make will just be based off where it was. So, right, it's only changing the right side unless I swap it. You can swap it to be the left side. All right, so clarity. Clarity is another type of contrast. It's a contrast within itself. So it highlights contrast inside. It's kind of a detail. It's kind of like sharpening, but not quite the same thing. It's another contrast slider. It essentially brings out more detail, but it also can go horribly wrong depending on the type of picture. Now, a car picture like this, you can go pretty far with clarity. As you can see, it looks, the more I go, the stronger the image looks in this picture. You start seeing a lot more of the light shining here on the wet pavement. You see, and if you go to the left, it removes that contrast. It also makes it look kind of a glow to it. It gives it a little bit of a glow, where this takes away some of that. So you can see how the contrast inside the picture is changing, which is not the same thing as the contrast up here. They're two different types of. I would guess you would call this a detail contrast, where it highlights the details in a picture. It's not the same as sharpening. It's just changing the contrast. But some pictures can take a lot. Some pictures can't take much at all. Some you want to turn down. In this case, auto photos, you can turn them up a lot. Cars have a lot of detail, and you like to look at it. Vibrance, let's say a portrait though. A portrait generally does not like clarity unless you're trying to make it look gritty, because it really looks kind of ugly when you start. It brings out lots of things that you don't want brought out but there are cases where a lot of times where I'll see a lot of contrast in portraits is like you're doing a sports pose. It's often in sports where you're doing a sports pose and you want it to look gritty and strong, and you can turn up the contrast a lot or turn up the clarity, and the contrast is turned up a whole lot. So that's where clarity will show up.
I was just thinking of the movie Sin City, where they might have used.
Yeah,
made it look,
300. The 300 is another 300. Yeah.
Right, where they did made it look, as you say, grittier.
Yeah, you want it to look, that's a look, and that's generally where they probably increase the clarity as such. Vibrance is a color change, a color enhancer. It's different from saturation in that it doesn't. I guess what's the best way to describe saturation? Saturation increases the color. It increases the amount of color that's already there. It can go too far. Obviously, when you turn it to the right, it makes those orange lights. It makes things more orange. Those light.
It's the intensity.
Yeah, it's the intensity of the color. Where vibrance is more subtle. It doesn't.
Is that the dark to light version of the color? It's not more red. It's just darker red.
Or more red instead of
lighter red.
orange. It's like this lighter has red at one side and kind of orange at the other side.
Well, it's more color, but it's not the same as saturation. Saturation takes the color and adds, so it will add more red to the color. What I believe vibrance does is it makes the color stronger, but it doesn't add color. It does not add it. So I guess the way to say it is that if you have red and you turn the saturation up on red, it gets more red, where vibrance just makes the red stand out more without being more red. I mean, it does add color to it, but it's not the same addition. If you turn them both up, you can get way out of the color, but it emphasizes color differently. And usually I don't touch saturation unless I want to turn it down. I don't usually want to turn it up too much. If I want to add a little bit of color, I usually use vibrance because it's a more subtle change. It can make things too much of the color that they already are when you use saturation. Vibrance just makes that color stand out a little bit more. Sometimes you want to add saturation if you're trying to do that, but it depends on, if you're trying to be dramatic with a picture, yeah. So in this case, I would probably want to add a little bit of contrast with the tone curve, and you can do it by grabbing on the curve here at different parts. So these sliders down here determine where the differentiation is, because you got highlights, darks, and you can see how it's highlighting the part of the curve that will be affected. And this sliders where you can change where the barriers are for that. So if I want to change, mostly the dark part of the picture, when I change these sliders, if I want to give the darks more preference, I'm not gonna. We can make the shadows really dark, or we can pull them up a lot. So this is another way of adjusting your shadows and your highlights, which gives you a little more control over where it determines a highlight and a shadow is, as opposed to the highlights and shadows, which are the highlights and shadows sliders that we just saw. And so this gives you some presets right here where it can do a strong it gives you a little bit of a contrast preset to it. Linear is just where any changes you make automatically, then you can add a little bit of contrast with the defaults there. I don't use this for color pictures very much. I don't go in and edit my colors all that often on this one manually. The only time I really use this is when it's a black and white and I want to change how the black and white is affected by the color that was in the picture originally. So that's where I use, so I'm not going to go over this one much, but I mean, certainly we can go in and change, if we wanted to change certain colors to be, if we wanted to make the orange a little more into the red side, but to me, that you can do subtle stuff like that, but I'm not going to go into that one right now. The only one, I showed you a little bit of the black and white one.
So that's like if, in a color picture, maybe the red and the blue were the same intensity, and in a color picture, they look really different because one's red and one's blue.
Right.
If you go black and white, then maybe they look the same.
Right, that's where you could, yeah, so in this case, say if we went to black and white, so now we know that those lights were orange, well, let's turn them up. Let's make them brighter. And that's only affecting the orange in the color. Or if we wanted to make them, say,
So
hey,
it's
those
not
are black.
changing the car's tone.
Right, the car didn't, other than the reflection, because you can see down on the, the front right fender where it was reflected in the light, it changes a little bit, but it's not changing anything but the orange lighting that was in the picture. So we can make that brighter. And, the car was actually white, so we can't really change the color of the car because it was mostly white. It might have had a little blue in it, but, there was a little bit of blue, but other than that, it was mostly white. So that changes how much the black and white is affected by the color in the picture itself. I'm in black and white. Yeah, well, no, I'm not in basic. Basic is where you turn on black and white.
Oh, but you're in black.
Right. And that's why when you want to do black and white, you click on the black and white setting as opposed to moving your saturation.
You had color sliders under black and white.
Right, but those are, so the color, I mean, there's color in the picture. So what you're telling it to do is how do I interpret the color in the picture into black and white? So you see, the taillights back here were red, so we can make them brighter by turning up the taillight color. Just turn up that taillight color so that, because we know that they were lights on, so we might want them to be a little brighter because the lights were on. So, if we keep it, we can turn the lights off completely. So this is what this does is let you set how that black and white is interpreted based off the color that was in the picture. And that's one really interesting way. This is where the importance of turning a picture black and white is, where you're going to find a lot of your fine tuning in that black and white as to how, that way you can emphasize certain colors over others. Like if I'm taking a picture of a landscape, I might want the greens to be brighter, or I might not want them to be brighter, depending on what's in the landscape.
So Greg, you can go to the black and white, do that fine tuning, and switch back to color. It keeps those same settings.
Right, it'll remember the settings because when I'm not in black and white mode, those settings mean nothing. But when I go back to black and white mode, it remembers that I'd made those changes.
Oh,
That could help you adjust for a more subtle effect because you're in the black and white mode.
Right.
but it remembers the orange that you changed in black and white?
Yeah, it will remember that I changed it. It remembers that I changed it because I didn't tell it to reset, so it goes back and remembers that.
Somebody said one time, suggested, that in working in black and white, in working with a color image, go to black and white first and work with your contrast in black and white, then go back to color.
Yeah, you can do that with that's not what I was changing though, but you can check the contrast and such. You could do it that way too. That way you can, if you want to just set your contrast and things, you could do. Yeah, that can be some sense in there too. Split toning again, there's not a whole lot. In this case, I don't want to do split toning on this picture because that adds color that's not really there. I mean, I think it's, you can this is I call this your Instagram filter because Instagram does a lot of the split toning in its filters. Usually it's adding color and such isn't there. So this is kind of your Instagram filter panel where you can go in and change your color and add color that wasn't there I don't do that a whole lot unless you want a certain look. If you're trying to get an old photo look or do some kind of strange look to it, that's where you would go for split toning. Or black. Now, black and white, it's very interesting because that's where, like I said, that's where you can make it look like a sepia photo or an old photo. So again, in detail here, detail a car picture, you can go way up on your sharpening. So we can go way up, and we don't even have to mask much at all. We'll mask a little bit because obviously we don't want to sharpen the sides of the car, but we can add a little bit of masking just to get the edges. I don't need any, because the ISO here is at 100. I don't need to do any noise reduction because it's already as noise free as it can be. Lens corrections have already been applied, so I don't need to do this because those are already applied. If transform, let's see, we did auto, so we know that it did a little bit of transformation to make the edges straight. If we wanted to add a little bit of a vignette to it, I usually go maybe about -10 or 11, unless if you really wanted to go dark to show off just the car. But you see the effect of it is it darkens the sides and brings out the car a lot more. But you can go subtle with it just to have just a little subtle hint of it there. We can add fog and dehaze doesn't change. We don't want to go too far with dehaze on this.
It's looking, it sounds like a lot of it is get in there and play with it.
Yep, that's really what it is. And so what I'm trying to, and this is again, we can change our camera settings. I forgot to change the camera settings here, but I think portrait makes it too much orange in the lights. This one may actually be one where your neutral is probably your best choice for this one because it's not a portrait, it's not a landscape. It's you can change other things that do have the same effect. So in this case, I would call this picture. The other thing I would do to this picture is a little bit of cropping because we've got the mess down here of the side which we don't want in the picture. So in this case, I would probably crop it down. In this case, I like using the 16:10 for something like this, or maybe 16:9 if that's not enough. Actually, I'd probably want to crop out this part of that missing column there. We're right up the edge of the column just a little bit, and maybe just a little bit on the right, just to try to get some of that. So that looks, a whole lot better than what it used to. That's the original. By the way, that is the backslash key. The backslash key will show you, that's another way of doing before and after. So this is the before, and this is the after. All it does is just shows you, takes away the edits just briefly, and then go back and see what it looks like. So you can see that I've had people tell me that it looks like one of your car catalog photos. So they're
So, and there's another, what is it? Control Z?
Control C is undo.
Undo just the last one.
Just does undo the last edit. And the other thing, now let me bring this panel back up here for a minute. This history shows everything I have done to this picture over time. So you can see every single edit I made over time, and there's a lot of them, and it remembers every little one. You can go back, you can click on any one of these at any time to go back to that point. And it will, so let's say if I wanted to go back to a convert to black and white, yes, it goes back to that, and this is where it was when I was at that level, at that history level. So I can see where I was when I was at that point, and then I can go back to my, the final edit by clicking on it on there. So you can go back to at any point to your edits in the history and see what you did. And this is how it knows to apply what to your pictures. It keeps its history for all time for this picture until you get rid of them. It even knows when I reset the settings on sometimes. So
Now to get back to your final,
This is it right here. The final's the top one.
okay, top one.
Yeah, the top one is
The
the,
most recent.
yes. That is
Okay,
the
so as you go down, you're going back.
you're going back in time. So yeah, so all the way to the bottom is the import.
The original.
Yeah, the original. That was the original. Now, let me scroll up here. So you see all these settings up here now. I can't give you these, but these are these presets. When you get Lightroom, it has. You'll see these Lightroom presets up here. These are preset edits that you can make to a photo. Let me go bring up a different photo. Let's bring up this one here and show these presets. So what it has, go back to my edit. It has some built-in presets where you can click on this, and instead of going here and adjusting all the sliders, it has preset slider movements for you. So here's a black and white filter preset, and we can watch what it does over here when I click on it. Say blue filter. See how it's giving a blue is where it's biased towards in the black and white, or it can even go more high contrast, or it can go for green or orange. So what it's doing is that these sliders are saved as a preset. And you can just click on that and it automatically applies those edits for you. And it's got multiple ones here. And then you could go over here and do a high contrast one where it, so it's got different ones. Now it doesn't have Lightroom doesn't have very many presets to it. But you can go in and click on these presets and have it automatically apply multiple edit changes at once. So you can create an aged photo, and what this is very likely doing is this is probably changing our split toning. No, it's not changing split toning, maybe doing color then. It's probably doing saturation. Which one is it doing? No, it's not changing those. I'm not sure which ones it's changing. Oh, it's probably changing color. Is it changing color? I don't know which ones it's changing. Somewhere it's making changes to the photo. Could be temperature. Yeah, it's changing temperature. So you can see how it's changing under the basic panel. It makes changes to the photo to give it, and it's neat that you can, because you can do it here in temperature, or you can do it here in the color too, or your split toning. So you can do it in multiple places to get the same effect. So here they're just changing basic, changing the temperature and changing the vibrance, and they cut back on the color and such to make it look like an aged photo. So they've got different ways of doing it. So let's say you wanted to make your, let's reset. And let's say you want to make, so what I was telling you about what you do when you import, on the import screen, you can tell it, apply this preset. And if I were importing this picture, I can go over here on this lens correction, set lens corrections, and then I can create a new preset based on, we call it lens correction. So this tells you what it's going to change. So with all these changes, right now it's set for clicking. It would do all these changes. But in my case, the only thing I would want it to do is I would only want it to do the lens correction. So I go up here, click on lens corrections, and then you click create, and this is the folder. So you have a folder of presets. So there's I've got all these different folders. So you can create a new folder. It has a default for my presets. I've got one that I created called user presets. So what that would do is then I have this new preset create. So now I've got this lens correction preset. When I go to my import screen, and I can go over there. Let's go to import real quick, and I'll show you how. So what I'm not going to actually import them, but you see this develop settings over here on the right, apply during import. this kind of gets back to, and this is where it would go down, where you could go down here, user presets, and there it is. I've got another one that's, I think it's under my preset, so it's the same. I've already got the same one somewhere else, but
What was that under?
I created the one under user presets.
But on the panel?
This is under apply during import. Now, this is where the question that you had of applying the camera calibration. This is where I would, let's say if I, let's go back to my develop module. Let me also apply to this photo a camera calibration. And we'll do it Adobe Portrait. Or Camera Portrait, sorry. Camera Portrait. I can then create a new preset. We've got lens corrections, and then we can do calibration. And now we could call this, lens and calibration. And it will do both those edits at the time I import the picture, and I don't have to do it for every picture. Now, because we've got multiple camera portraits, or camera modes, we might want to call this portrait, lens and portrait, and then create another one for lens and landscape.
It doesn't say portrait up there, it just picks up what you.
Right. Right. Well, the place it says portrait is over here on the right. That's, I'm just giving it a name. So this lets me know that if I apply this preset, it's going to apply the camera calibration portrait to it as well. I could do another one for lens and landscape. If I wanted to have another one for landscape pictures, when I'm importing landscape pictures, I can do the lens and landscape. And you can do any number of these to them. I used to do auto tone, but I stopped doing that because a lot of pictures looked really bad when it did that, so I stopped doing it. So really, lens, I would say lens and like camera calibration are probably the only things you would want to apply as a general rule. But it's also kind of useful that you could, if you had like multiple pictures across cards of the same thing, you could like edit one of them and then import it and have it do the same thing to all those pictures as you import them if they're all the same. I mean, that's a little time saver if you wanted to, but that's kind of unusual of a case. Generally I wouldn't do more than like calibration, lens correction. But I'm not. So that's I didn't want to cover that last time because that was part of the import process. But I wanted to show you how you can create your own presets. So, but what I've done is I have gone through and I've found presets from other photographers who are professionals, and you can purchase these. So Matt Klaskowski is one person. The one that I use the most is Nicole Z. Her name is she actually her name is actually Nicole Young, or Nicole S. Young. She's a photographer, and she's married to another photographer, and she sells presets, which lets you do a lot of the edits I was just showing you really quickly. So she's got some, like, I'd say there's like 100 or so presets in this one group here, where I just go through and I click on presets to edit my picture instead of and then I make little bitty changes on the side to the right. But for example, for this picture, you can look and you can see on the navigator what a preset will do when you apply it, sort of a little preview to it. So I can get, say that looks pretty good. So that applies a group of edits all at once to a photo, and you say that looks pretty good. That's better than, that's kind of like clicking an auto, but you can, that's a good place to start. And then I can go in and make a few changes. She's got multiple camera calibrations in here where she's actually edited the camera calibration specific for, so if we pick different ones, you can see how the changes are made. She's edited them based on different ones. So you just try them and see what they look like. So generally you do have to pay for these. That's, you have to buy them from the photographer. They have sales and such. I recommend trying to find some good ones. Like Nicole Young is one, Matt Klaskowski is another. I know he's been updating them a lot. There you can also find free ones out there. There's some people will give out free ones. Generally though, they're a good way to shortcut doing your editing as opposed to having to go into all these sliders for every single picture.
So you find it online and then you just purchase it?
You purchase it, and then there's they tell you how to import them. They give you a file that you will import, and it's pretty easy. They all have instructions on how to import those presets from their files.
How much do they typically range?
Some of them I think overcharge. I mean, some of it. I try to keep it around to around. I think I may have paid like $25 or $30 or something for this group of settings here, maybe 50. This is like over 100 settings, or because it covers her settings. These settings in particular cover just about all the range of the panels here. So it gives you some preset values that you can use. And I've bought a couple of hers, 2 different ones, which are different. They do a lot of the same things, but they're different. So this has got basic sharpening, basic noise reduction. So it's a whole lot easier to come over here and just click on it, because once you get used to what it does, what it'll do. You can click on it and you know what a picture would look good as. So, and you can see just by clicking on that one preset, we got a whole lot better picture than if I well, it doesn't do it that way. Make it bigger that way.
And Greg, you can program your own presets.
Yeah, that just showed you how. Yeah, any edits you can make any edits you make you can save as a preset. So if you have for portrait, you want to do certain levels sharpening or whatever, you can make all those presets. So you could actually go through and make all these up on your own, but it'll take you a while. I mean, she spent time on it, so obviously you got to compensate her for the money. Now, one other thing, let me show you what you can do is, okay, let's say this picture is complete. Let's say I'm done with this picture. I just applied that one edit. Well, this one over here doesn't have any edits on it yet. I can come over here on this photo. I can do under the photo menu, I can go down here to develop settings, copy settings. It brings up this panel of which settings do I want to copy. So I'm going to go ahead and check them all, except usually the only things I don't do is transform, and I don't do spot removal. I'll cover what that is in a minute. And I don't do, where is it? Local adjustments. I think there's one more. Is there is cropping on here?
Yeah.
There it is. Oh yeah, cropping. Then I can copy them. So this will take all the settings, because everything else here, these are all things that are generic to a picture. I didn't want to do, you don't want to do transform or local adjustments, spot removal and crop. Those are all, I consider those specific edits to a picture that every picture will be different. But these could be, if I'm doing pictures that are very similar, I can then, once I've made those edits, I can come over here and develop settings and paste it. And it automatically applies the settings to that picture. So I don't have to, if I've got a lot of same pictures, and this actually really applies when you've got a lot of pictures that are the same, like say fireworks. Now let's say we apply some changes to our fireworks. We'll just do a quickie kickstart here. Actually, that one looks a little better than all that. And then you can go in and apply, so I can copy these settings. I'm also right-clicking. You can also right-click to get there. So we'll copy it, and then you can select your pictures, and we'll select all these firework pictures down here. And then when I do a paste settings, it applies it to all of them. So I don't have to go, one firework picture is going to edit pretty much the same as all the others. So now all my pictures are the same, have the same edits to them.
And you selected a group.
I select, yeah, well, just like any other windows, anything else that you do select. In this case, I picked the first picture and went down to the bottom, and I held shift and click, so it selected everything in between. There's another way you can do this. Let's say I start with this one, and I can go down here and select. I can do, the other thing you can do is sync settings, develop settings sync. What that means is any change I make to this first picture, will apply to every picture in the list automatically. So now that they're synced, if I went in and edited this picture, let's say I upped the exposure a little bit. Let's do it a lot so we can see it. See if it's going to show it. It may not show it, but I think I have to. I think I have to do it again because I did. Oh, I think I have to change it one more time. So let's copy it. Copy. And then I think I have to go sync it again because it didn't sync say.
That's not a camera.
Oh yeah. Slide off. I think you have to be in a develop module for that to actually work. But you can see it's applying all those changes to those pictures.
And to stop the sync, you just unselect.
Yeah, you can unselect the ones on the changes. So if I change, let's say I change, let me bring this, come on, just that one. I want that to stay up. There we go. I know it's small, but if you it's sliding, you can try to fix it so it's level so you're not tilting your head. There we go. Don't hit the cord. Now if I change the white balance, let's say we change the white balance. It's supposed to synchronize. I may not have done it right. Oh, I turned off sync. There we go. It wasn't syncing. Is it changing it? I can't tell. Can't tell if it's changing it to the other ones or not. I know it's supposed to do this. Maybe I've missed something on the syncing. I'll have to get back on that. Is it changing it then?
So you got to a sync by up at the top. The photo.
Yeah, there it is. There it is. See, it auto synced them. So now that you see that I changed the white balance, it just take it a minute. So you can see if I change the white balance towards blue, it changed all the pictures to the same. And then when I changed, yeah. So if you've got pictures that are, if I'm editing all my same pictures, I can see that they automatically all change.
And that's with auto sync.
Right. I had to first select the pictures and tell it to synchronize them, and then turn on auto sync here, and so you can see how they changed. All of them changed at once. So if you've got a bunch of pictures that are all the same, this is one way to edit all of them at once. And then you can go into each one and do fine tuning on them if there's a few things that would be different. Obviously, the exposure is probably too much up, so you wouldn't want it to be. Turn down the exposure. You can see the exposure turned down on all of them. By the way, fireworks are one where clarity works really well. Works pretty well for another strong clarity. Clarity also brings in shadows a little bit too, so you're going to see more of your shadow. This is another one where your highlights are important. You actually don't want too much shadow. You want it to be darker because the fireworks are the important part. Let's see. So does anybody have any other questions at this point? Oh, let me before I cover up these, I want to cover what these do in just a little bit, but I want to see if there's any questions at this point before I get into those. All right, let me bring up. So let's edit this beach picture and make it look. Yeah, we turned our exposure way up on this one. So let's.
Is there a way to get back to zero? Is there a way to fine tune sliders? I have a hard time just moving them just a little.
You can go over here and type. You can click. You double click on it will reset it. Double click on it resets it.
Double click resets it to zero.
Yep. Double click resets it to 0. You can also, if you hold down the Alt key, that reset tone will reset all of them inside a panel. So that reset, if you hold down the Alt key, it changes and it will it shows you what to reset. And you click on that reset and it will reset it to 0. That's another way to reset to reset them all, just that particular piece of it.
And what about just moving it just a little bit, making small?
Well, and
adjustments?
you can use your arrow keys.
And my arrow keys seem to make it jump like 2 or 3, not just one increment at a time. But if you,
Let's see, the arrow key. Oh, I'm going back and forth in photos. That's the wrong buttons. I'm hitting the wrong button. It's up and down. Up and down is the button. I was using left and right, which was changing pictures. So it's doing 1/10.
so it's up and down.
Up and down is like, 1/10 of a change here. You can go in here and type a number in though.
Oh.
Yeah, so I can do -4, and that puts it, that's obviously too far, but but yeah, you can change, you can type in numbers.
You said plus or minus.
Right. I think you can also hit plus. Plus and minus does it too. Plus and minus is the same thing as up and down. I'm using the plus or minus keys for these. So.
Okay.
Oh, did I still level that? Yeah, that's auto. So, okay, so let me go into this here. Let me hide this again. This is your spot removal tool. And note that it shows you can use Q for that. So what that does is it brings up turns your cursor into a spot remover, not for your dog spot, but for anything you don't want in the picture. Let's say we don't want, now Lightroom is not as good as Photoshop. Photoshop is the best at doing this, but Lightroom can do it at a certain level of removing spots. Let's say we want to remove this particular footprint here for one reason, or say there's a cigarette butt here obviously you don't want a cigarette butt in the middle of your beach picture, but pretend this is so you can change how I'm on the Mac. I can change how big it is. I believe, no, that's the exposure, but you can change the size of it. Change the size of it. I believe that if you're on a mouse, it would be your little wheel will change how big this is. So basically your scroll bar, it changes how big it is. The feather is how much, how big of an area around it. It gives a gradation between it. Opacity is how strong it will make that heel. Usually when you're removing a spot, you need it 100% because you want it completely gone. But if you're like trying to de-emphasize a spot or whatever, you could set the opacity to lower so that it wouldn't completely remove it, but would de-emphasize it, but it would still be there. The difference between clone and heel is clone will take a piece of the picture. Let me bring it down here. So if you go over here and you click on it, what Lightroom does then is it takes another piece of the picture that it kind of tries to auto-detect and find something similar and replace it. Clone does a strict replace. So you can see that wherever I move it, it will copy. If I put it over here, it copies part of the ocean directly on top of it. Yeah, you can move this around. Obviously, if Lightroom does not, yeah, and you just grab it and move it. And if Lightroom doesn't pick a good spot, you can move it around to find a better spot. And I will say about 95% of the time it will pick a bad spot. So whatever it picks will be wrong, so you want to move it around. Now clone is doing a complete, I'm taking this and moving and copying it over there. Heel does a little bit different where it tries to take what it sees and blend it. It's a blending of, now in this case, it's a blending of what the original and the source. In this case, so if I wanted to remove that, I'd probably want to pick somewhere. Actually, I probably picked too big of a hole, or too big of a thing because I can't pick a good spot. And it's, yeah. So I went to, there wasn't a good enough, so I click on that, and you see it picked. In this case, it picked over here, which, what it's doing is, because it's not cloning, it's healing. It's taking the smoothness of this and applying it to, and blending it into the sand there. If I did a clone, it would make it a perfect copy, which is obviously wrong, but with a heel, that actually looks pretty good. So, and then you click on it to make it go away, and you say, well, it's gone. Footprint's gone. I'm gonna skip. I don't remember what this one is. Oh, that's red eye. This is if you take a portrait and you want to correct red eye. This is an automatic red eye. I haven't had red eye, and the reason you get red eye is when you're using a flash and you point it straight at the person, it will reflect the light back. If you don't do that, you won't have red eye, so you don't have to worry about that. But this is a way to correct it if you need to. It's just an automatic. It's not something I ever have to worry about. So, graduated filter. Graduated filter is a way to make changes, and once again, this will reset any settings you had. Make changes across the picture. For example, let's say I want to brighten up the sky, but I don't want to brighten up the bottom. Well, I can draw a graduated filter. So what you do is you click on graduated filter, and then you click and drag, and it creates these 3 lines that shows I will be making a change to, and I'm going to go down here and select, it will be making a change to what is now the red spot, the red area of the picture. Right now I have no changes that I have made, but let's say I want to increase the exposure. You undo the mask overlay so you can see the change. So if I change the exposure, it's only affecting that graduated part of the photo.
Above the whole photo above.
Right. From basically what it's doing is this is the point at which it will make the picture change. This is the midpoint of the feathering, so that so it will gradually apply it. It will gradually lessen it as you go down. And this is the midpoint of that feathering. So it will 100% apply it up here above, and then this is about 50%, and then it will start graduating away until there's nothing. So and you can adjust this line here, these lines to reduce how much it feathers, and then you can move up and down, and you can also rotate it. So depending on how you want it to look. So let's say, oops, I want it to be to the bottom. Well, I could change it so it's the bottom. So that's one way you can apply a change to part of a picture, but not, I'll see, now I'm applying it to the bottom. I've got it set to apply to the bottom because I rotated it the wrong way. So there we go. So I could change, and these are all the things you can change. I could change the temperature of the sky, different from the, and actually one place for a sunset you might want it to be warmer, but now you might want the ocean to be warmer, but not the sunset above it. So you can change your temperature one section and your exposure somewhere else, and so you can change all these different things, and you can apply it multiple times too. So let's say I want to do it again, you can apply it multiple times to another one. So I've got 2 different ones, and depending on the one I'm working on is the one I've clicked on. So that's it depends on whichever one you click on is which one you're affecting. So you can do multiple applications of the same thing. If you want to really double up on some change or subtly change it a little bit in different places, you can apply multiples of these and just click on the one you want, and then just hit delete to get rid of the one you don't want.
And you do delete.
Right, and anytime you want to create a new one, you click on new and then just draw another one on there, and then you're editing that one, or you can click on the one you want to edit. Now, let's say I don't want to, let me show the selected mask again so you can see my change here. Let's say I didn't want to apply it to these right here, where you have a brush over here. And what this brush does is it allows you to change different pieces of, let's say I wanted to apply it a little bit down here. I can add, by clicking, I can change my brush and add it. So any changes I make to this one will also apply to that part that I colored in that's out, even though it's outside the gradient, it will still apply it because I brushed it in. So you can see that it's changing that even though it's not part of the gradient, it's now an extra piece. Where you might what you might actually use this for the other way is to erase. Let's say I had a tree over here that I didn't want to affect, so I could go over here, and it's easiest if you go and show selected mask so you can see what you're affecting. That I can erase parts of this, and it won't affect the part that I erase. So you can take the graduated filter, and then you can selectively edit with inside that filter. So if you've got a large area and you just want a little piece of it that you don't want to affect, you can go in and erase the part you don't want after you apply it, and it'll let you change. This over here is an adjustment brush, which is only a brush. So you can paint. It does the same thing, only it's just applying to wherever you brush. That's what the adjustment brush over here is. The gradient filter just gives you a way of doing a large gradient area. And this gives it in a circular area, or I should say a circular or oval area. So you can apply it within the circle, or you can come over here and you can invert it and apply it everything outside the circle, depending on which way you want it to go. Sometimes, like if I want to darken an image everywhere except inside the circle, like frequent with a portrait, you might want to darken. This is another way of applying like a vignette where it's not centered. The vignette tool that we showed under effects is only for centered. It only does centered. It'll only center the center of the image. This gives you a way of creating a vignette or certain edits to a picture. Usually I would use this for darkening or lightening, or if I'm sharpening. If I want to sharpen a landscape, but there's a person in the middle, I don't want them too sharp, so I can apply this, like stick this around the person and then use the brush tool again, which each one of these has a brush tool, and I can brush in specific parts of the image or out or erase certain parts to edit. So, and then you can make changes within just that piece.
So this is changing anything outside the circle.
This is changing all the red. Anything the red, where you see the red, that's just showing the overlay so you can see what it's affecting. I just turn that on just to see what it's affecting, and then you can turn it off. And everything, so if I change the exposure, everything outside the circle changes. So
Is there a way to do the opposite of just changing inside the circle?
if I want to change inside the circle, I go invert mask, which then does the opposite. Same with the brush. If I brush in something here, nope, I'm sorry, I'm at that brush. So I've got my brush here. Now it doesn't have an invert mask, but what it has is auto mask. What auto mask does is it kind of helps you from going over the edge, so it helps you color in the lines. Is what its intent is. It's best shown when you do this here. So if I'm coloring in here, you can see it's not really getting it. Well, it is on this one, but you can see how it's. You see this. If I had a better edge on here, this one doesn't have as strong of an edge because I might be able to. See if, I don't. Yeah, the feather might get it. I think I might too much on the feather. Let's delete this one and start over because I've gotten it too far. Let's start a new one. But you can see that it's still getting my still getting too much. You can see it's getting too much on here. If you've got a strong edge, it will usually do pretty well at keeping within the lines. These edges may not be strong enough for it to notice, but it's essentially kind of a way to help you color within the line so you don't spill over where you don't want it to apply. You can, if you turn that off, you can see where it's kind of spotty right in here. That means it's not, because the contrast in the color there is strong enough that it's not getting all of the waves. So if you want to turn that off, like, yeah, I'm going to be making big swipes, so then it's just not going to mask anything at all. It'll just color freely. And then you can turn it on for some fine tuning just to keep you from going over the sides where you don't want it. And that applies to, let's see, and this one doesn't have a mask. This has the invert mask. So the mask just means what you're masking, and this one doesn't, and the graduated filter doesn't have an invert mask on it, I don't think. No, it doesn't have an invert mask because you can just flip, you can just turn it around, you just flip it around, so it doesn't, the only one that does it is the circular one for the invert mask. And if I, like, when I create a new one, let's say I've got, say this one I've changed, let's say I change the exposure here to be further, and then I want to create a new one. Well, if I draw it, let's see, I think it's, sometimes it remembers the changes. If you ever want to undo, if you ever want to reset, just hold down the Alt key again, and it brings up that reset, and it resets everything for you. Yeah, so anytime if you make changes, say, no, I don't want to, or if it's, if it remembers certain changes and they were there before, sometimes it remembers the change, it remembers the last one you did, and if you don't want it to do that, if you want it to reset it, then you can hold down the Alt button, and it's got that reset, and that'll zero everything out, so it's not there.
Removes the last one.
If sometimes it does. I've noticed sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I think I've reset them all, so they're not there. But sometimes when I make changes, it will have the previous change, like from a completely different photo that I edited. It will have whatever, exposure change I made, whatever, which would be completely wrong for this one. So you can just hold the Alt key down and hit reset when you create a new one, and it will undo any of the changes that were in that, so it doesn't look wrong when you do it.
Greg, does Lightroom allow you to change like the sky, like Photoshop does to it?
Photoshop, if you want to edit, if you want to change it to a completely new sky, that's a Photoshop thing. You're not, Photoshop or Lightroom doesn't have a way of replacing elements in a photo.
Because that would call for layers.
Right, that calls for layers or cutting and pasting and adding into a photo. This is only, Lightroom will only do edits within what's already in the photo. It won't, you can do you can do that spot editing, that spot removal we saw, but Photoshop, when it comes to completely replacing something with something else, you really want to go to Photoshop. That's not a Lightroom thing. There are other tools that can, and it doesn't have to be just Photoshop. I've got other editing tools that I have used. I will show you an editing, let me show you an editing tool that I use. It is, right now it is only out for the Mac. It is in beta for Windows and will be out soon. If you are using Lightroom, it is easy to edit a photo in Photoshop by just going up here and edit in, and you can bring it up in Photoshop right here if you have it. I mean, that's it. And the other thing I use a lot, the one I want to show you real quick, this is not part of the, I'm going to go ahead and pause recording or stop the recording at this point, as long as if there's anything else, because I just want to show this to you just to make you aware of it, but this is not part of the class. So I'm going to stop the recording at this point. Does anybody have any other questions before I do that? Any other questions?
Yes. Right. You did before you click, and I think that you click delete in the bottom when you did the adjustment.
Mm-hmm. See, on here, or?
No, you did something the last. Sorry, my English.
Oh, removing this. You're talking about
For
removing.
example, yeah, and then I think that you click.
Then you said,
Click,
Greg, she's talking about when you went
delete.
down to the bottom, you went down to the bottom to say you apply, I think you clicked on Y.
Oh, you're talking,
I think that you
Or
click
left-hand
because
corner.
and something is made like this. You click a bottom there.
down here?
Yeah.
Oh, that's just delete. That's just to delete those changes
You
to it.
delete.
Yeah, if I didn't want that change on there, you just highlight the one you don't want.
Yeah.
Highlight the
Well,
one-
you click on it, so,
Ah,
and then hit the delete button, it goes away.
Okay.
That's how you get rid of it. It's like, oops, I didn't want that. I didn't want that one after all.
didn't work. That's-
Yeah, and this is why spot edits are one of the ones that obviously you don't want that to be across pictures. So when you copy pictures, but sometimes you do. If you've got a lot of pictures that are the same thing, and you want to apply the same edits, like a portrait or whatever, and you have a lot of the same edits, if the pose is mostly the same, then you could copy those spot edits and then just come in here and move it around just a little bit to get it just right. But if it's the same spot edit that's across the same pictures, it's just not exactly in the same spot, you can still copy them across, and then you'd move it to be in the right place, and maybe slightly tune it. So it would save you time from having to redo that entire spot edit. You just have to fine tune it a little bit, and it applies there. So let me show you this other tool. It's called Luminar, and I've been hearing a lot. The reason I want to show this to you is because this is one that I've been seeing a lot showing up with,
Did you stop the recording now?
yeah, I will stop the recording. All right.